Before the story begins, before the silence settles in, take one quiet second for yourself. If stories like this mean something to you, if you miss slow stories, human stories, stories that don't scream for attention but stay with you long after they end, then subscribe to the channel. Because every small click tells YouTube that soft storytelling still matters. That not every story needs explosions or chaos to touch someone deeply. And if somewhere in this story you recognize a feeling you've carried quietly for a long time, leave a like. Not for the algorithm alone, but because support like yours keeps stories like this alive. Now lower the noise around you. Put your phone down for a moment if you can. Let the world wait outside. And promise yourself something simple. Don't rush this story. Some stories are not meant to be consumed quickly. Some stories unfold slowly, the same way loneliness does. Elena used to believe love could survive almost anything. Stress, time, distance, exhaustion. She believed that if two people truly loved each other, they would always find their way back. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but quietly, naturally, like rivers returning to the sea. For years, that belief lived inside her so deeply that she never questioned it. Never stopped to check whether love was still alive between her and David, or whether they were simply living beside each other out of habit. Because habit can look dangerously similar to love after enough time passes. And that was the frightening part. Nothing in their marriage looked broken from the outside. They lived in a beautiful home with warm lighting and carefully chosen furniture. Their neighbors admired them. Their friends described them as stable, mature, comfortable. Comfortable. Elena had started to hate that word. Comfortable sounded harmless. But sometimes comfort becomes the quiet graveyard of intimacy. Every morning began the same way. David woke up first. The soft glow of his phone lit the darkness before sunrise ever reached the curtains. Emails, messages, market updates, deadlines waiting for him before the day had even properly begun. Elena would open her eyes slowly beside him and watch the blue light reflect across his face. Years ago, he used to pull her closer in the mornings. Years ago, mornings belonged to them. Now they belong to notifications. Morning, he would mumble absent-mindedly. Morning, she would answer softly. Then silence. Not angry silence. Not cold silence. Just emptiness wearing the disguise of routine. And somehow that hurt more. Because arguments at least prove that two people are still emotionally reaching for each other. But indifference is quiet. It enters slowly. It sits at the dinner table unnoticed. It sleeps beside you for years before you realize how lonely you've become. Elena tried not to think about it too much. She filled her days the way many people do when they are avoiding themselves. Cleaning things that were already clean. Rearranging shelves. Watering plants twice. Watching television without remembering anything she saw. Sometimes she stood at the kitchen window longer than necessary, watching strangers pass outside. A father carrying his sleeping daughter from the car. A young couple laughing while arguing over grocery bags. An elderly man walking slowly beside his wife. Ding moments. Tiny proofs that connection still existed somewhere in the world. And each time she watched them, something small inside her ached. Not because she envied them. Because she remembered. She remembered who David used to be. Back when they first married. They lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat that rattled every night like the building itself was exhausted. The ceilings leaked during storms. The heater barely worked in winter. Their kitchen was so small they bumped into each other constantly while cooking. And yet Elena remembered those years as the happiest of her life. Because David noticed her back then. Really noticed her. When she spoke, he listened as if her thoughts mattered. Not politely. Not halfway. Completely. He remembered things no one else remembered. The fact that she hated drinking water before bed. The way she became quiet whenever she was anxious. The scar near her wrist she used to hide with bracelets. The names of her childhood pets. The dreams she whispered late at night when the world felt asleep enough to trust. He once spent 3 hours helping her paint a cheap wooden bookshelf, because she casually mentioned wanting their apartment to feel more alive. 3 hours. Now sometimes he barely looked up from his phone during dinner. People think relationships collapse through betrayal. But sometimes they disappear through neglect so subtle neither person notices it happening. And that is what terrified Elena most. There was no villain in her marriage. No a fight. No screaming matches. No cruelty. Only distance. And distance is harder to explain. Especially when the other person technically still loves you. One Thursday evening, rain tapped softly against the windows while Elena prepared dinner alone. David had texted earlier. Running late again. 3 simple words that somehow felt heavier every month. She moved quietly through the kitchen while music played faintly from a speaker near the sink. The pasta boiled. Steam fogged the windows. Garlic and butter filled the air. It should have felt warm. Home should have felt warm. Instead, the silence wrapped around her like something cold. Without thinking, she reached for 2 wine glasses before stopping halfway. Her hand froze. Then slowly, she placed one glass back into the cabinet. Because lately David hardly touched the dinners they shared. Most nights he ate distractedly while answering emails or taking calls between bites. Sometimes she wondered if he even noticed the meals she cooked anymore. And immediately after thinking that, guilt arrived. Because Elena was not angry at him. That would have been easier. She understood how hard he worked. She knew the pressure he carried. The long hours. The expectations. The endless responsibilities. Which somehow made her loneliness feel selfish. So instead of speaking honestly, she became quieter. And quiet people become invisible very easily. When David finally came home that night, rain clung to his coat and exhaustion clung to his face. Sorry, he sighed while loosening his tie. Today was insane. Elena smiled gently. It's okay. And she meant it. That was the tragedy. She always meant it. He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly before checking his phone again almost immediately. A tiny movement. Small enough to seem insignificant. But loneliness is built from tiny moments. He sat at the table while typing rapidly with one hand. Elena watched him carefully. Not with anger. With grief. Because the man sitting across from her still looked like David. Still sounded like David. But somehow no longer felt reachable. Everything okay? He asked suddenly, still looking at his screen. She almost laughed at the irony. Was everything okay? How could she even answer that anymore? Yes, she whispered automatically. And there it was again. The lie that keeps relationships alive long after intimacy dies. Later that night, Elena stood alone in the bathroom brushing her hair slowly, while David worked from bed with his laptop glowing against the darkness. She studied her reflection carefully. Not searching for beauty, searching for herself. Because somewhere over the years, between routines and responsibilities and emotional exhaustion, she had started disappearing from her own life. She could feel it. That quiet fading. As if she had become a background character inside her own existence. When she finally climbed into bed, David barely glanced away from the screen. You sleeping already? He asked. Long day. She paused. Such a simple question. But she realized something painful in that moment. He wasn't really asking. Not fully. Not the way he used to. Years ago, David would have noticed the sadness in her voice before she even spoke. Years ago, he would have closed the laptop, touched her hand, looked at her carefully, and asked again until she told the truth. Now he simply accepted the first answer. Yeah, she said softly. Just tired. He nodded distractedly. 5 minutes later, she heard the quiet tapping of keyboard keys again. And for reasons she could not fully explain, tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Not broken sobs. Just silent tears sliding across a tired face in a dark room beside someone who no longer noticed them. Because the deepest loneliness is not being alone. It is being unseen by someone who once knew you completely. And as rain continued tapping gently against the windows that night, Elena stared into the darkness with one unbearable thought slowly growing inside her. What if nothing was technically wrong? And that was exactly why it hurt so much?